Hello, we are Team 6 here to present the argument that infotechnology is not improving the lives of people in developing countries. Technology has exploded. Many journal articles talk about how technology will revolutionize our lives, improving humanity and propelling us into a new era, the information era. Developed countries reap the benefits of information technology, but how many of these improvements truly impact developing countries? First, we're going to look into how information technology has widened the digital gap between developed and developing countries, and cases where developing countries are exploited by developed countries. Then, we'll explore the effect of infotechnology on governance, specifically the control of information and the surveillance of citizens. Finally, we will present the effects of infotechnology on the environment, as well as the cost to build infrastructure in developing countries.
The first sub-argument of argument 1 is that information technology widens the gap between developed and developing countries, and also between the people of developing countries. Economies of developed countries have higher wages, as the total factor productivity is higher. The higher wages induce firms in advanced economies to use technology such as robots to substitute for workers from developing countries. As seen in the figure, most developing countries have a relatively low minimum wage compared to the developed countries. In the long run, when technology continues to be developed, the productivity of robots and other substitutes for worker rises, benefiting the economy of the developed countries more, while leading the gap to grow larger. The chart demonstrates the risk of unemployment for each job type. The higher the percentage is, more likely people in this field are substituted by the technology. Working positions in basic industries such as food preparation and garment manufacturing that the economy of developing countries rely on are at great risk of taking place by automation. The development of technology is also a driving force in widening the gap between the rich and the poor in developing countries. As developing countries adopt new technologies, the rich will use the advantage of accessing these technologies to reinforce the gap. As shown in the table, the rich have the advantage of education and resource, helping them to remain at high income while opportunities for low income jobs are taken away from the poor by the hands of technology. In India, for example, as the poor have limited access to education and technology, their income tends to rely on low skilled jobs. However, as technology progresses, a great share of the sector indicated in red of GDP in India might be substituted by technology related jobs, lowering the overall number of working opportunities for the poor and increasing that of the rich.
Technology has further increased the divide between developed and developing countries as the workers in the developing countries are being exploited in the production of these new technologies. It's very common for large tech companies based in developed countries to offshore their production to developing countries in order to reduce their labor costs and ultimately increase their profit margins. This is because in developing countries, the wages are often much lower than that of the developed countries, and it's also more common for laborers here to work longer hours. Just as an example, in China, they have a legal working limit of 44 hours, but this law is not really enforced. So the workers at companies like Foxconn, which is the company that produces Apple products, these laborers are working upwards of 60 hours per week, taking a toll on not just their physical health, but also their mental health. Here we have a map indicating the minimum wages across different regions of China. As you can see, the wages range from 145 to 378 USD, which is a lot lower than what you would see in Canada or the US, and this obviously makes it a lot more attractive for companies to offshore their production to a country like China. And on this slide, we have a map of the annual working hours across the globe. And again, it's clear that many parts of East and Southeast Asia are working the longest hours, making it a lot more attractive for companies to offshore their production here versus somewhere like Canada or the US, where the working hours are a lot less throughout the year.
The digital divide between developed and developing nations becomes more catastrophic when you assess the difficulty of trying to close it. If tech in developing countries remains behind, the people in these areas will continue to suffer the economic and social hardships that come from being globally disconnected. However, supplying the citizens of a developing country with modern tech is not an easy task. It requires time and government resources. This point is driven home through the unsuccessful One Laptop Per Child program, which is a non-profit organization which sought to distribute laptops to children in the developing world. Although extensively designed to cut costs, the laptops designed for this project ended up over budget, and as reported by OLPC News, attempting to provide every child in Kenya with one of these laptops would cost 75% of the country's gross national income. But could spending all this money to catch up on tech be beneficial for those developing countries? It's actually more harmful. There are limited resources available for improving the lives of people. This means that if resources are to be allocated to tech, then less resources may be given to other areas, like schools and hospitals. Seen on the slide, a report from the UN revealed that Kenya is witnessing chronic underinvestment in their social sectors. Their budget for health, education, water sanitation, and social services reaching only 10% of the total. Additionally, the digital divide leads to a gap in the cybersecurity infrastructures between developed and developing nations. Many developing countries struggle to effectively manage cyber risks because they don't yet have sufficient resources, skills, nor regulatory frameworks to do so. Cyber attacks can impact the safety and resilience of a country as well as undermine the benefits of its digital growth, because government and industry data within those countries are left highly vulnerable.
Another reason as to why information technology may not improve the lives of people in developing countries is that their government agencies could use information technology to enforce authoritarianism and ultimately maintain their power over citizens. One way this is done is by controlling information flow. This is known as the splinternet. Governments of developing countries may use censorship to maintain power and suppress dissent, or to promote their vision of society and limit outside influence. One example of this is the heavy restrictions to social media platforms and media outlets in Venezuela after the re-election of President Maduro in 2018, after many opposition parties boycotted this reinstatement. Another example is in China, even nicknamed the Great Firewall of China, where the goal of the Chinese government is to shield residents from certain information that the government considers to counter the best interests of the country. This level of censorship limits citizens' freedom of speech and ability for self-expression, allowing governments to spread disinformation and limit diversity of opinion, ultimately distorting the idea of democracy. Information technology also allows governments to conduct mass surveillance on their citizens, which may cause intimidation. The surveillance in China allows the government to leverage data on their citizens to maintain their authoritarian rule. The government in Iran uses spyware to monitor and control protesters as recent anti-government demonstrations has broken out.
Our third argument as to why information technology is hurting developing countries is that these countries don't have the proper waste disposal systems, nor do they yet have the infrastructure in place yet to make full and effective use of such technologies. In many developing countries, over 90% of waste is disposed in unregulated dumps or burned. This causes a strain on people's health and the environment. Today, electronic waste has been emerging as one of the most significant environmental challenges and health issues in developing countries. Only 20% of electronics are currently recycled, with millions of tons ending up in landfills, wrongly mixed with metal waste, or illegally exported to poorer countries for a fee. Many of the developing countries, such as India, have become the world's dumping ground for e-waste, as countries such as the US, Canada, and Australia ship their e-waste to developing countries instead of properly disposing of it themselves. It's developed countries that produce the majority of electronic waste, but it's developing countries that bear the brunt of it all. According to the Global E-Waste Statistics Partnership, e-waste grew by 21%, and only under 20% of e-waste was properly disposed as of 2019. In addition, e-waste disposal has become a large threat to the health of people, particularly children, in developing countries. According to the World Health Organization, e-waste disposal emissions can cause respiratory issues, DNA damage, impaired thyroid function, and increased risk of diseases such as cancer and cardiovascular disease later in life. With so much e-waste being pawned off to developing countries, the adverse health effects on people would become unmanageable given their current healthcare system and infrastructure.
Information technology can help developing countries with education, business, and many other aspects. However, to reap these benefits, developing countries need to have a solid base to build on top of. Imagine teaching a baby calculus when they can't even count. The baby has to learn simpler math concepts for multiple years before they can build up the knowledge to understand calculus. Just like the child, developing countries need to focus on building their foundation to be able to understand how to use information technology effectively. They would have to upgrade educational systems and technical training, improve their business environment, and enhance their logistics and networks in order to make use of new technologies. To solely integrate information technology without improving on their current systems would result in a huge waste of money and time. Manufacturing has been around for a very long time and has helped countries develop to what they are today. It is a tradable sector which allows domestic output to be unconstrained by demand and income levels at home. Additionally, it does not place significant demands on skills, which in turn creates more employment opportunities for low-skilled workers. The These characteristics collectively make manufacturing an excellent vehicle for developing countries to achieve higher incomes. Therefore, a country cannot rely on information technology to grow. It does not have the same characteristics as manufacturing, since e-commerce would require citizens to contribute to the market, and technology requires skilled professionals. This creates considerable uncertainty regarding if information technology would truly impact low-income countries positively.
We've presented how the connectivity brought about by information technology has led to the exploitation of developing countries. We've also seen how info technology has allowed many governments to exert greater control over their citizens, and we've explored how the presence of technology has led to a greater strain on the environments of developing countries. It is for these arguments that we believe that information technology does not improve the lives of people in developing countries.